Hello, I will be giving my presentation about my life. So, during the prenatal development, my mother was given an ultrasound. And what happened was she went to the doctor and they put a type of petroleum jelly or a clear gel on her abdomen and used a sonogram to determine my gender or just to even determine any underlying illnesses. Um, and this was actually her first view of me in a physical form. During the cognitive part of infancy, I began my development of object permanence. My dad would play peekaboo with me, and he would cover his face and uncover his face. And during this process, I would either be surprised that he was behind those hands of his, or when he had covered his face, I would actually know and I'd be slapping him. So that was just my process of learning object permanence, learning that hidden objects were actually there, still there. During the physical part of my infancy, I began to learn how to crawl. So I'm showing these gifts to show you how I started to crawl. So I became back. I was on my back and I started to roll over, and pretty much got to the phase where I was crawling on my hands and knees toward my mom or my dad. During the psychosocial part of my infancy, I was a very clingy child. I would cling to my dad and my mom whenever they would drop me off at daycare, and I would feel very insecure that they wouldn't come back. During the early child cognitive part, I was obsessed with Barbies. I actually thought that they were physical beings, physical human beings that talked and actually had lives and souls. And so every time I would play with them, I would think that they were actually real. And every time I would put them back, I would still think that they would be living their lives. So, yeah, it was animism for me. During the physical part of that, I became very into drawing in color books. My fine motor skills were refined in this aspect. And during the psychosocial part, I went through a phase called electrocomplex, where my dad just became my center of attention, and anybody who kind of came in the way of our relationship, I would pretty much throw a temper tantrum or slap them. That includes my mom. So I was really clingy toward my dad during that part of life. During my middle childhood, my cognitive aspect was me being bilingual. I started to learn different languages, and I was just using my brain in that way. During the physical aspect of that, I became very involved in athletic clubs, so cross country, cheerleading, softball, and even boxing. My gross motor skills became very, enhanced during this time of my life. This also led me to be more prone to injury during this age. During the psychosocial part of my middle childhood, I became aware of myself in society or just even like in my family. I started to understand where I was in life and how old I was and how I fit into society or into school or into society, into my environment. During the adolescence cognitive, I started to use my prefrontal cortex, and I started to think about my future, the kids that I wanted, or even like my careers, so firefighting, a doctor, paramedic. During the physical part, I started to notice physical changes in my body, such as height. The psychosocial part, I started to have an identity of myself, a better identity of myself, self-realization, and understanding my strengths and weaknesses, and how I can improve myself. During emerging adulthood, the cognitive aspect, I became just more aware of where I wanted to be in the future, career-wise, and how I would get there. So I was more thinking into detail about how I would achieve my goals. During the physical aspect, I started continuing my activeness, and I would go to the gym, box, or even do cross country. That was a big part of my life, and my gross motor skills became even more enhanced during this time. The psychosocial aspect, I used my friends to help hold me accountable, and I also had them around me to just guide me and influence me. So I surrounded myself with people who can help lead me in a successful direction, and I also just became more aware of my strengths and weaknesses and understanding just myself a little better. Thank you for this opportunity.